Hey everyone, it's Robert over at Burton Racing. In this video, we're going to be going over quite a few new products. We have our legacy Honda engine harness here, as well as a few sub harnesses to complement this product, and a full chassis wiring kit with fuse box, chassis integration harness, and switch panel. So first we want to take off with the engine harness. This product is a complete standalone ordeal. It does not rely on what chassis you're running. If you have a Mini Cooper or a 1992 Honda Civic EG Coupe, it doesn't matter. We've really made this harness so it can integrate and get you up and running real quick, real simple. We have an ECU here, for example. So we would mount this ECU wherever you would in the chassis. We have a lot of length here on this harness. We already have an integrated firewall plug, so you don't need to purchase anything. Just cut the hole in the firewall and you're going to be sealed up in the cabin, no problems. We have our 3 OBD1 ECU connectors. This harness only supports OBD1 ECUs. That is because they are the most modified ECU on the market today. We wanted to make sure this harness was going to allow anyone and pretty much everyone that modifies their vehicle or uses it in a race application. We want to give them access to an easy harness to set their vehicle up. So we have OBD1 ECU connections. So we have the ECU plugged in, and we have a couple other connectors here. We have our chassis side connection. So with the chassis side connection, we have 4 wires to a DT Deutsch connector. We have 2 larger gauge power wires. One's going to power the ECU. So you would run power to this wire or use our integrated fuse box, which we'll go over shortly. So you'd run power to this wire and it will power your EFI circuit. So that means the ECU, the fuel injectors, and any sensors that may be on the engine itself. Then you have a heavy gauge wire for the ignition system as well. So this runs up the harness to the distributor connector to power the coil or coil packs, whatever you're running on your particular motor. And then we have 2 more chassis connections. We have the ground circuit for the fuel pump and the ground circuit for the radiator fan. So what this is going to do is allow the ECU to send the ground signal out to control the fuel pump and the radiator fan independently. We also have a Deutsch DTM 12-pin connector. We are going to go over this in a minute. This is for accessory connections. We have a standard 5-amp mini fuse connector here. Now what this does is it allows you to safely power the ECU and the engine harness. A lot of people are going to want to plug this straight to the battery. We allow you to do that because we took this precaution, which is not industry standard, unfortunately. We made it so all power going into the EFI circuit of this harness is completely fused. So if anything happens up here or anything happens anywhere else in the chassis, we're actually keeping your ECU safe. It's not going to be damaged by any electrical failures, or let's say there's a car crash and you're going to short circuit something if there's heavy damage. And this really protects your larger investment at the ECU. Now we also have 2 bus connections. One is in black and one is in red. This is to really simplify diagnostic work and make it real easy for you to add features to the harness. Now, the reason we did this specifically is because this is a race-inspired harness. It's not a swap harness. It's not a tuck harness. It's not meant to integrate into a factory chassis. As you can see, there's no chassis or underdash sub harness with this setup. So what we wanted to do was, if you have an issue on injector 1 or you have a sensor that's not working correctly, all of these wires are labeled at the bus connector. So now you know exactly where to look and say, hey, I'm not getting 12 volt to my vehicle speed sensor. everything can be diagnosed on this end of the harness as long as there's no damage over here. We've even taken it a step further where we ensure that there's zero crimping or splicing done on the engine side of the harness. What that means is any splicing, bussing, or doubled up connections are all done down here. So when you have an issue, you're not spending time under the hot hood. You're back here and you're diagnosing the issue with 100% color-coded wire and easy to read pinouts. Everything is color-coded here. Everything is labeled. So there's no all black harness. There's no guessing. There's, oh, I hope this does this, or I hope this fixes the car. You will know exactly what's getting 12 volt. You know exactly what's getting ground, and you know all the signals and where they go at the ECU. There's absolutely no guesswork. Very easy diagnostics work done with this harness here. Less troubleshooting, more track time. So to move forward, we will come back to our DTM connector for our accessories, and we will come back to our bus connections. But to visit the engine harness side, to show you what this harness is capable of and what it does support, we have a very nice loom. Everything is tight. It's not like the cheap harness you see on, insert whatever website you want to. This is nice. We use actual glue line heat shrink. We use really high quality abrasion and flame retardant loom. All these looms are tight. They are not baggy. We don't have any big, ugly, distracting, bright color labels. They're all white with black lettering. Very basic, very clean. It's going to look much better in your engine bay. We get a lot of complaints about the yellow heat shrink and this and that. We use premium white heat shrink with black lettering, followed by clear glue lined heat shrink. We do not heat shrink it and then put a label back behind it. It's all integrated. Everything is right here. There's no doubling up. There's no stiffness. Look at this. This harness is meant to do this on a daily basis. So for supporting sensors and accessories, we have a standard thermostat ground here, vehicle speed sensor, idle air control valve, TPS sensor, and our map sensor. These all fit up nice to the engine. You're not going to have any strand hanging far down near your exhaust or your axles. This harness fits great on B series, D series, and H series, the legacy 1990 Honda engines. We also have our VTEC starter spade, our dash coolant, ECT for our engine coolant temp, and then our distributor plug. Now, some things to note. We are utilizing an OBD2A, the square 10-pin style connector on every harness. We are offering the jumpers to go to the OBD1 and OBD2B style distributor connectors. This is the most widely used distributor connector because it came with almost every B series that's USDM here where we are located. The jumper harnesses are very simple, very easy. If you need one, it will look clean. You're just going to have an additional connector here, and then it's going to go over to the distributor to allow you to run your same OBD1 or 2B distributor. Or if you want to go to an OBD2A distributor that fits your engine, you can do that as well. On top of that, we have our IAT, our alternator, and our injectors. So to go over some specifics, as you can see, these are not injector connectors, and this is not an alternator connector. So I'm going to cover the injectors first. So our injector setup is modular. We build sub harnesses. It's no additional cost for the sub harness, for the injectors, alternator, or anything else to get you running. Everything is meant to work together now and in the future. So if you have factory injectors now, we have a harness that's going to plug in. And then when you want to upgrade your injectors later, or you need to swap out an alternator, or you go into a different swap like in H series, all those components are available so that you can purchase them at a later date to make sure that you are going to be able to integrate the harness that you already spent money on with the future product that you're trying to build. So for our injector offerings, we have our standard OBD2. Plugs right into our harness. Very easy to swap. This takes 5 seconds to swap the connectors. Plugs right into OBD2 style connectors. Now, let's say you want to go to a performance or an aftermarket injector later on. We have our Bosch EV1, our Bosch EV6, and then our Denso style injectors here. So we have 4 total options for your injector sub harnesses. This makes it extremely simple to get you up and running. And if there's anything that happens, like let's say there's an engine fire or anything like that, typically it happens right on the fuel rail. So this makes a very easy swap and repair, or an easy swap and upgrade if you change to larger injectors or higher performance injectors in the future. Now, we did optimize this injector sub harness so that it can be ran over the intake manifold, just like factory. So you can work with it very easy. It's an easy visual in case you're servicing the engine on the track and you want everything where you in reach. Or we also have it so that you can very easily run this in under the intake manifold so that you can have a nice clean tucked look where you just run your injector lines up under the runners and then pop them through the split of the runners. That can be done with either harness that we offer. It's standard. You can go over or under with our sub harness. Now for our alternator, there's always an OBD1 or an OBD2 alternator. So we offer all those. We have an OBD1, an OBD2. So let's say you're going from a D series to a B series and it comes with an older OBD1 alternator or it comes with a newer OBD2 alternator. Not a problem. This is a very cheap sub harness that we offer, and it allows you to do a very easy swap. There's no rewiring or no jumping, hoping you're pinning it correctly. This harness is still untouched if you haven't noticed. It's modifiable without having for you to modify it. You just simply plug it in. Now, for H series vehicles, you have the alternator mounted at the front of the vehicle, where these alternators would go on the back side of the timing belt underneath the intake manifold. The H series has the alternator up at the front of the engine near the exhaust manifold. So you need a much longer alternator wire. So we sell an H series specific sub harness for the alternator itself. This one has an OBD2 connector on it. Also with H series, the starter is at the front of the transmission. So what we offer is a starter extension. So you plug this in and we include the heat shrink so you can then run this over, create a nice glue lined sealed portion right here, and now you've added a 10-inch extension to your starter wire for your H series build. So this can be, added on to, let's say you go H series in the future, you're still using the same basic harness and you really have to do very minimal work for this to work. So now we have gone over what this harness supports. You'll notice that it does not have an O2 sensor. It does not have a reverse light built in. It is missing certain features that typically would be there from the factory. This harness can be used on your street car, but it's not meant to support every street car accessory that comes factory on the vehicle. So you can absolutely add certain features, and we have some of those features already terminated here on the ECU side of the harness. So if you want to run IABs or boost by gear, or you want to use a check engine light, and a lot of other people are saying, hey, how am I going to operate a dash if this doesn't plug into my dash harness? Well, we've taken care of all that on this side here. So on our 12-pin DTM connector, what we have is we have a support for the following accessories already terminated, connected to the ECU, connected to the rest of the harness. So we have an RPM to send RPM signal to the dash. We have a starter signal so that you can engage your starter spade terminal. We have a dash coolant, so you can now run your coolant temp to the dash. We have our vehicle speed, so you can run the vehicle speed to the dash. So everything is there, whether you're using a Honda dash or another older analog dash. Now you have the ability to run all those wires independently over to the gauge cluster. They're already pre-tapped. You don't need to find the wire. You don't need to do anything. It's color coded and it's numbered on the pinout here that you receive with the harness. On top of this, we have an O2 input. So if you have a wideband, all you do is you plug it in here and you're already connected to the ECU. Now you just set the ECU up to accept the wideband. The thing with the wideband, they ask for a ground wire that's connected at the ECU for an offset. So we also have the ground wire. So if you want to connect any sensors here, you're already pre-tapped into the ECU, so you can connect your O2 wideband input and your logic ground for the O2 sensor as well. So now you have both connections and you're ready to go. You don't have to cut into the harness. You don't have to do any splicing or pinning or anything. On top of this, we have our VTEC pressure. So if you want to integrate a VTEC pressure sensor for a more factory style, operation of the motor, you can. That's already pre-terminated. And then we have our IAB for our secondary air injection. So if you have a GSR engine, that's already integrated. If you have a NOx sensor that you want to run, typically when we're tuning these older Honda engines, we bypass the OEM NOx sensor. But if you are wanting to operate with one, you absolutely can. It's already wired into the ECU. You just have to run the wires out to the NOx sensor. And then we have our SCS, which is our service check. So that is what's going to be, if you want to engage the check engine light. So you can do that. Basically, you just connect it to a switch and then you can turn on your check engine light whenever you want. And then another output we have is the actual check engine light. So if you want to run the check engine light over to the dash, you can, and your check engine light can operate as factory. You just use that in conjunction with the SCS signal so that you can flip the switch and then your mill light on the dash, your malfunction indicating lamp, will actually blink and show all of the check codes that you normally would with a factory car. It can operate just the same on your stock dash. And then on top of that, we have boost by gear already pre-terminated to the ECU itself. So that means you don't need to do any crazy wiring. You don't need to touch the ECU connectors themselves unless you're going beyond what we have already done for you here, which we have done a lot. We've really taken a lot of input from, doing this a long time, and a lot of other racers that are, not just racers, but restorers, people that restore these old Hondas. And 99% of the time, this is what they need. They're going to this ECU and they're trying to run this motor. And this is what we built to make that a big cooperation and handshake between all the parts being used. Now back to our bus connections. We have 2 open wires for our powers and ground. So if you want to power your boost by gear solenoid or power your E85 sensor or do anything, there are 2 empty slots here on your power and your ground. So now all you have to do is use this You may have your factory fuse box deleted if you're using the rest of our kit, or you may just not know what's the best way to wire this in. Well, when you wire this in here, you get this integrated fuse already. So you're good to go as long as the wiring at the sensor is done correct. You don't have anything to worry about. So if you have a ground issue, you know exactly where to look. If you have a power issue, you know exactly where to look. And these are reliable sources that are operating the entire ECU. Every single injector, every single sensor has a power and ground that go to these bus bars. So when you have an isolated issue with a specific sensor, you can come right here to the wire, look at our pinout and say, okay, we have a wire in section D and it's malfunctioning. I'm not getting 12 volt to my sensor. You can check 12 volt right here and then figure out if it's a wire issue or if the sensor is actually malfunctioning itself or faulty. So this is the engine harness. And we designed this engine harness to go a step further. And integrate into the rest of the system we built. So we have our DTM connection and we have our DT connection. Now, let's say you have a race car, it's stripped down, or you're putting this into a vehicle. It may have faulty wiring and you can't source it. We all know working with those OEM gremlins and the power supplies and the fuse boxes, and a lot of parts are obsolete right now. Or even a step further, we can say, hey, this is going into a car that never came with this engine. Not an issue. Here we have our integrated fuse box, our chassis wiring, our switch panel, and our sub harnesses. So I need to get power to my engine harness to run the engine. We have a few connections here. I have my power in. This goes directly to your battery. So this is going to supply power to your fuse box. This fuse box is a 4-channel box. So you have 4 fused inputs and 4 relays that are powered by those fused inputs. You have true 12 gauge with 20 amp fuses and 20 amp relays. So you are set to a 20 amp max. This is not meant to be an all out dual fuel pump car, multi-fan, 6 ignition coils, IGN 1A ignition. This is not for that. This is to get a standard engine or a practical race car together. Let's say you do SCCA. You have a drag car that's only an in-tank pump and a single radiator fan, or you have a circle track dirt car or something along those lines. This is going to work great for you. You can cut and remove all of the factory wiring and you can run the car just off this fuse box here. So we have our power in from our battery. We have our ground. We have 3 Deutsch connectors. We have a DTP. One is for fuel pump. One is for radiator fan. We have a 4-pin DTM. This is the power to the relays to engage them. And then we have our DT connection, which looks very familiar because all we have to do is plug it in. Now we have power to our engine harness. If we want power to the rest of the vehicle, we have our chassis sub harness here. Has a 2-pin DTM. Has 2 grounds, and then it has 2 connections. So we can set this up with an OEM radiator connector for your radiator fan on your Honda, or we can set it up with the T-type SPAL style connection, or we have our T-type fuel pump connection here. And what these are is they will plug in to the fuse box. Now you have your fuel pump connection here with ground. You run this to the back of the vehicle, plug it directly into your OEM top hat, and put your 10mm through the eye of the ring. Then you have your radiator fan connection. Run this through the firewall and run it up to the radiator fan, plug it in, and then use your 10mm bolt once again, ground it, and now you have a fully functioning fuel pump, radiator fan, and it's all powered by this fuse box here. Now getting to the actual control of the item. So we want to control the EFI for the ECU and the engine harness. We want to control the ignition for the engine harness. And then we want to have control over our radiator fan and our fuel pump. So there's two ways to do this. The quick, simple way is, hey, I'm installing this. I still have some of my chassis wiring in the vehicle. I want it to turn with the key. When I turn my key, I want to power everything and everything's okay. I don't want to manually control anything. I want to turn my key on, start my car, and let the ECU do the work. Not a problem. We have a jumper here. So this is our 4-to-1 jumper. So basically it joins 4 of our trigger wires here into a 5-foot lead. And now we run this 5-foot lead over to our ignition switch. Now this could be a single rocker style switch. It could be your OEM. You put the key into the steering and you turn it and it turns the dash on and it primes the pump and it does all that. You can just splice this right in to your original ignition switch. Not a problem. And now you have power at your fuse box and you're sending that power to all 4 of your accessories. Let's say you want to be more integrated. You want to be, it's more of a race car to you, or you just want more control over the system. That's absolutely not an issue. So you want to run one of our switch panels here. First thing you need to do, we have a 3-foot lead for our switch panel sub harness. So per normal, you're just going to plug it in just like we did with the other sub harness. That 4-pin is going to go to our 8-pin connector, which we share on our switch panel. And you have 3 other wires. You have a power. This can run straight to your battery cutoff, or if you have a kill switch or anything like that, you can run this straight to that. So typically on a race car, we'll have a motorsports grade power cutoff. This might be at the rear of the car. It could be on the dash, is pretty common for a lot of auto sports in SCCA time attack cars. So you run this to that. Now when the battery is on, we are powering the switch panel, and the switch panel controls power to the rest of the system. We have our starter output, and then we have a ground terminal. Theoretically, we typically mount these into the center console or the radio bezel or something along those lines. So there's usually some metal framework there. So you just attach your ground ring terminal here, just as you would with any other ring terminal. So you have those 3 wires, and then we have an empty slot so you can add an accessory later on if needed. Your starter signal here, in most cars, that can power the starter directly. But fair warning, if you have a vehicle that takes a lot to turn over, it's very power hungry, or you have a car that's just not starting and you're sitting there and trying to turn it over for extended periods of time, you may need to look into adding a relay between the starter switch and the actual starter itself. As starters, even though they aren't the actual solenoid, they can become latched and they can suck a lot of power, and there can be large amperage spikes, and that can cause damage. If it's over, this one is rated for 10 amps. If it's over 10 amps for extended amount of times, it can damage the wire. So just be forewarned that this is set up for normal cars that turn on, turn off. They're not meant for a car you're trying to sit in the driveway and crank for 5 minutes straight. So we have our fuse box. It's plugged into our chassis. It's plugged into our engine. We have our sub harness that's going to run over to our switch panel. Now, our switch panels are cool. They are pretty much one of the best on the market. I'm dare to say, if not the best for an analog style rocker switch panel. Now, this switch panel comes in a few different formats. We have the flat panel where you put the screws in. So if you have a walk-off plate or something like that, this guy's going to fit real nice. It's going to sit nice and flat up against the dash, and you can secure it with nuts and bolts. We also offer the radio bezel. So this is a single DIN radio bezel panel. And what that does is it allows it to fit in a lot of single DIN radios. The slots where they go in there, you have a little washer so they can wedge themselves up against the framework, and then they will hold this panel in. As you can see, they are a little bit different in sizing. One's longer and narrower than the other, and that is to be acclimated for the actual radio itself. Now, we also offer the variation of blue switches and red switches. We have all those options on the website. If you have any questions, let us know. What makes our switch panel different? One, this is all brand name parts. So we use real Carling switches. The Carling Technologies, they are the ones that have built this Contura style rocker switch for many, many years now. Now you have a nice click. We've taken this up a notch. As you can see, our wiring is very nice out of the back here. It's all grouped together. It's going to a nice DTM connector. It's all color coded, and they're in actual plugs. So if anything goes on here, you can actually detach the plug. You can replace your switch. You can add more pins. Let's say you want to go to a different switch that has 2 outputs or 2 inputs or whatever the case may be. You are actually able to modify this down the road. We use all high level parts. We have seals. These are the actual, being name brand, they are the IP rated switches. The bezels on the front with the LED indication for the colors, they actually are much brighter than the cheap ones. I know a lot of guys are going to say, hey, I can buy this for $30. You can, but let me show you what you're going to buy for $30, because I have 5 of them on my shelf and I already wasted the money on them. So I'll save you the time and money. So this is what you get for $30. Now, I'm going to let you know, all of them came broken and they're all unopened. So you do the math on that. So when I open this up, like I said, it's already broken in here. So I have one switch broken, and you're saying, okay, that's a $3 switch, no big deal. To let you know, our switches are $10 each. So in materials, we have half of the cost of the actual assembly just in materials, between the plate, the wire, the actual connectors that this does not have, the name brand faceplates. Everything right here is high quality with support. So here we have one here, and we already have one broken and then 2 broken. So 3 of these came broken. That's nice. So these are just falling apart. So I don't think you want to go and spend $100 on a track day and then just pick up Legos. So as you can see, this is just a real junker. Now I know what you're saying. Oh, no big deal. I'll buy 2 for $60 and I'll put them together. Cool. So the quality is different. The quality is different. Not just that this is broken. You can see, maybe you can't see from the camera, these are much clearer right here on the LED indicators. These come up dull and dim. Now, we don't think you need super bright lights. Keep in mind, On top of that, they also have the same switch for every single one. We have a momentary switch here, and we have single indicators along here. These have dual indicators. So this thing's gonna look like a Christmas tree, and it's gonna be in your face all the time. So you have your switches, and you say, hey, I need to rewire one. Keep in mind, most of our switches only have 2 or 3 wires going to them. No big deal if you need to do something. You want to modify in some way. You say, oh, I'll just unplug this. Okay, no big deal. You unplug it, right? So if you go to unplug this, what happens is it has a little pin here, and they unplug sometimes, or they don't unplug at all, or they pull the actual pin out of the back. So the switch is now useless. So more pins out of the back. All these are the actual pins that go into the switch. The switch has no pins on the back now. It's useless, 100%. Now you're saying, oh, well, it can't be that bad, right? So, I can just take this, and you can't get that off. So either the wire breaks or the pin breaks. And as you can see, all I did was try to pull the wire off. So now I have 0 out of 6 switches on my panel that I just wasted $30 on. And now you're gonna have to get online and buy something like our product to, actually be able to use it. So now we have the mess cleaned up. And we want to hop back on topic with our switch panel. We have our sub harness that's plugged into our fuse box. And here we have the switch panel itself. Now, I'm going to do an example of how the switch panel works and lights up and everything in just a minute. But what we have here is our high quality Carlin Technologies name brand switches. We have a master, we have a starter, and then we have 4 accessory switches. So I'm going to plug this in real quick, and we are going to go over what the switches do, how they operate, and how we intend them to operate. So here we have our 6-channel switch panel, and we have it powered on. You can see we have an indicator right here on the bottom of our main switch. This indicator helps to showcase that we have power to the panel itself. This helps for diagnostic, and it's also a bit of a dummy light to say, hey, you left the key in the ignition, or the battery cutoff is still turned to the on position. Now you know, and you can fix those issues, and then you won't come back to the vehicle with a dead battery. Our main switch, when it turned to the on position, has the large LED indicator. Now we don't want a excessive amount of lighting, so our accessory switches do not have ready indicators. We only have the on position indicator. This makes it a lot easier. If you have this ready indicator here on the bottom and top, you do have power to your switch. The only way you wouldn't have power is if this switch itself didn't have power, or you have a bad switch. We have a momentary starter switch here, and then we have our 4 accessories. So our 4 accessories are going to be our EFI. This is going to send power over to the harness. Then we have our ignition, which sends power to our coil. Then our 3rd accessory is our fuel pump. So we send a power to the fuel pump at the rear of the vehicle in most cases. And then our 4th is the radiator fan. Now, the cool thing is our main switch now acts as a kill switch. So you can have the vehicle running, and you can say, oh, I want to kill the ignition and turn the car off, but leave everything else on. That's fine. But in case of an emergency or an accident or something where you need to cut power everywhere instantly, this main switch will do that for you. But with our main switch on, we have power to our 4 accessories, EFI, ignition, fuel pump, and radiator fan. Now, we have it on our harness set up so the ECU is controlling the fuel pump and the radiator fan. But the cool thing about this is now we can manually allow that, or we can bypass it and override our ECU control. So let's say I want the vehicle running, but I need to get out and work on the car. I need to do something, or need to, just get under the hood and make sure the vehicle's running and there's no leaks or something like that. But I don't want the hot radiator fan pushing the hot air all over me. So I can cut the radiator fan off momentarily, get under the hood. It's a lot quieter and it's a lot cooler under there without the radiator fan pushing the hot air around. So I can manually override with this switch. And now I have everything running, everything in the ready state. If I want to, I can turn the car over with my momentary switch here. There's no LED indicator because where you're going to push on the switch is covered up by your finger. So there's no LED necessary for this switch. And as soon as you let off, it's a momentary, so it goes back to the normal setting. And we like this switch here because now we have isolated our main cutoff. And we've shown in a very obvious way that, hey, don't touch this switch. You don't want to touch it while the vehicle's running. You don't want to engage the starter while the vehicle's running. So with this switch being a solid bright red, it's going to indicate that to you, and it's going to isolate the master switch for emergencies. You can kill it quickly. Now, if I want to do anything else, I control and override anything I want. With this switch turned off, I can't engage the starter. With this on, I have access to all my accessories individually. And you have the ability to wire this in to the sub harness, to our fuse box, and then it will work with the chassis and the engine harness portion. Or you can buy this as its own accessory with the sub harness, and you can wire this in and use it as a universal option as well. So that is our overview of the system, how it works, and everything that you need to get a vehicle running. So it's a very straightforward setup. This is what comes in our package here. Our engine harness, our fuse box, our chassis sub harness, our switch panel sub harness, and the switch panel itself. All you need to do, connect the ECU, connect your battery, run any required wires over to your dash, whether you want your dash RPM, vehicle speed, or coolant temp, or check engine light to work. They're all right here at this connector here. We include the accessory connectors for the harness, so you don't need any additional purchases. You let us know what engine you're using, what style connectors you're using for the engine harness. Those are all included. If you do purchase a sub harness, you upgrade injectors or change out an alternator at a later date. That's not an issue. It's just an additional purchase because you're buying additional parts. But for the purchase of the harness, it comes ready to run with all of the startup sub harnesses, your injectors, your alternator. And if you have an H series, we include all the parts to have your H series vehicle running as well. You can purchase these parts individually. Once again, you can purchase the switch panel by itself. You can purchase the fuse box by itself or the engine harness by itself. And the great thing is they all work really well independently and they work perfectly together. So this is all that is needed to get a chassis up and running. ECU and connected to the engine. We have our ignition also running to the engine. We have our fuel pump and we have our radiator fan. We have power to them. We have fused relays. We have a switch panel to control them and arm the relays. And that's it. That's all you need. You can install this in a 1990 Honda Civic or a 2000 Prelude or a 1996 Integra or an old Mini Cooper, or maybe you have a newer car that you are putting this into. You're building a dune buggy or anything like that. This is all you need to get up and running. This is one of the very first affordable kits we've ever seen on the market like this. We're very proud of this. Your harness is long enough to reach. There's no additional purchases. We include our firewall grommet and we include everything you need. All you got to do is plug it in. That's pretty much it. So now we're outside. We want to show you guys the on-car and how the system integrates to the chassis. So we have an ECU plugged in here. It has a HON data board in there, which we want because then you can see the LEDs on the board turn on when we arm the EFI relay. So we have our engine harness. It's on our H series vehicle here. So we have our H series specific adapters and our OBD2 injector wires for the sub harness. We have our fuse box here that controls the EFI, the ignition, the fuel pump, and the fan for the radiator. Then we have our switch panel sub harness here and our switch panel itself. The reason it's kind of messy here is because we have like 5 foot of wire kind of tucked under here. We just want to show you guys the actual running of the vehicle and how it works. We also have this fused circuit breaker here. That is to just show you guys how the switch panel reacts when we connect it to battery. Most people will have a motorsports grade battery cutoff or kill switch there, or you may be using this to run it to a factory ignition system to ready your fuse box. So we just want to use this to send power to the fuse box and the switch panel, just so you guys can see what it looks like when you turn the vehicle on. So when we turn the vehicle on, we get our ready light here. That means we have power to the switch panel. So when I turn power to the switch panel, I have my indicator lamp showing that, okay, everything is ready to be turned on. So this is my EFI switch. That's going to give power to my ECU and everything related. So like the fuel injectors and any engine sensors. And then I have my ignition switch, which is going to give power to my ignition coils. In this case, I have my distributor. It's an internal coil on this specific motor. And then my third switch here, I have my fuel pump. So that means I'm going to be sending power to my fuel pump. We do have a thrown together chassis harness here. So I have one wire sending power to my fuel pump and the other to my radiator. The reason we had to make this different from what you see us offer on the website is because we're outside of the vehicle. This should be mounted towards the passenger floorboard up under the dash somewhere, but we're obviously out of the vehicle so we can showcase the electronics. And then here's my radiator fan. So when my ECU tells the radiator fan to come on, I can either leave this engaged permanently and let the ECU do all the work, or I can use this as a kill switch. In case I want to be under the hood working on the vehicle while the engine's running, I can use this to just kill the radiator fan and then I don't have hot air blowing in my face. So everything is on right now. And then my last switch is my starter. There is no indicator LED here because where we would press it would be where the indicator goes, and it's not engaged unless you press it, so it would be useless. We have it red so you don't accidentally hit this when the engine is in running condition, and it also acts as a nice separator for our master switch here. So in case of an accident or an engine failure, you can just hit this guy here and it kills everything all at once, and then you don't have anything live on the vehicle in case you run into a circumstance where that's necessary. So now I can hear the fuel pump prime. Everything's turned on. I'm going to turn the motor over. So now we're running. We have our ECU on. I'm going to connect to the ECU. I can see the data log here on that 850 RPM. I can see the maps info TPS. Charging voltage is 13.5, right where we want. I need to go over the error codes. I have 0 error codes. So this harness runs the vehicle as it should. We do have a bad power steering pump, which is the knocking noise you hear that does go away when you rev the motor up. But other than audible issues, the motor is running very smoothly. It's running just how it should from the back. Now, if I want to, I can go to parameters here, go to my protections. I'm going to choose to turn the fan override on. So now my fan is on. So if I want to, now I can use these switches to kill things independently. So let's say the fan is on, the car is at temperature, I can now kill the fan. If I want to shut the car off by killing the fuel pump, the ignition, or the ECU altogether, I can do that if I need to. If I need to solo them out and do them individually, maybe I'm trying to diagnose the vehicle while I'm at the track. This makes it very easy to say, okay, my fuel pump is not optimal, or I'm having it in ignition issue. Now, let's say I want to kill everything altogether. I want to turn the car off. Now you turn the vehicle off. The reason my indicator LED is on here is because I have the laptop plugged in. So anyone familiar with Honda, that's typical. You plug in your laptop and your board lights up. So now I have everything plugged in. I want to start the car again. I'm going to disable the fan for now so that you guys can hear me better. And as you can see, all the lights are on. They were already in ready mode. I use this for my kill switch, power on, power off. I can hear my fuel pump prime. Car starts right up, no issues. Keep in mind, we have our starter wire plugged in here. This has just jumped over to the 12-pin DTM. On this connector, we also have everything we need for the dash. So we have the RPM for the dash and the coolant for the dash, as well as many other features with our DTM connector. This here, running to our fuse box, we're supplying ECU power from the fuse box, ignition power from the fuse box, and then we're using these two as ground outputs from the ECU to ground the relays. Our green is fuel pump and our blue is for our radiator fan. Now, if I want to, I can enable these full time so I can manually control them 100% of the time and the ECU is not doing any of the work. But for this case, to simulate the vehicle running, we did want it to perform as factory. We still have our bus connectors here. So we have our power and we have our ground. And then we have our independent ECU fuse here. So for you guys not using our fuse box, that's perfectly fine. You can use this to run power directly to the ECU, and the ECU is still fused and protected 100%. And everything behind this fuse, such as the injectors and everything else, all the sensors on the engine are protected as well. If you have any questions, you can reach us at sales@burton-racing.com. If you want to see any of the parts individually or in the kit, you can go to www.burton-racing.com.